Today's daf is daf Nun. We'll start with the Mishnah on Memtes Amid Beis. Now, this Mishnah and a number of Mishnayos to come are dealing with bar. And with regard to bar, the Torah tells us, Ki yiftach ish bar, o ki yichra ish bar, v'lo yichasenu. So either he opened up a bar that was dug by someone else, or he dug his own bar. And he did not do shmira by covering the bar. Nafal shomashar chamor, bala bar yishalem kesef yoshev lebala v'amesi alo. So now the Mishnah that we're going to learn here on Daf Mem Tesamid Beis is going to try to explain that the chiyuv of bar applies not only b'rshus harabim, which is the simple pshat in the Torah, but even b'rshus hayochid, so that in certain cases a person digs a bar in his backyard, and he'll be chayev if someone's shar falls into his bar. And here's where we start the Mishnah: hachofer bar b'rshus hayochid. So again, you would have said he's within his rights; he can dig whatever he wants in his backyard. But psacho l'rshus harabim. In other words, he dug it in such an angle that part of the bar enters into Rishus Harabim, and that's the entrance into the bar. So now if somebody's walking down the street, he could inadvertently fall into the bar. Oh, and again, he'll be chayev for this, but the Mishnah is going to give us a whole list of cases where he's chayev. Oh, a second case where he's chayev is b'rshus harabim. Okay, he dug the bar in b'rshus harabim. So l'chora, the Mishnah is not telling me anything new when it says he's chayiv, but the chiddush is psachol l'rshus hayochid, which means the entrance into the bar, if the bar was dug on an angle, is in rishus hayochid. And whenever you have a bar b'rshus hayochid, the owner of that private property has a right to say to the injured party, what were you doing in my rishus? But the answer to that problem is going to be a major element in this sugya, which is called hifkir rishuso. And what does it mean? That although the entrance into the bar through which the shar fell is in his private property, but he was mafkir the rishus all around the bar, up till what we call the sfas habar. And basically what he did was he made his own private property into rishus harabim, so that now anyone who's walking right near the bar, or a shar is working, is really walking in rishus harabim. So that's why he's chayiv then. Now we have a third case, b'rshus hayochid, upsacho l'rshus hayochid acher. So a man owns two backyards, and he digs a bar underneath one of his yards, and the opening, the entrance into the bar, is in another one of his private property. And once again, he was mafkir the rishus around the bar. And in all these cases, the Mishnah says chayav. Now, once the Mishnah establishes that you're chayav for digging a bar, whether or not you dug it in rishus harabim, or even if you dug it in your own private property, the Gemara wants to point out now, based on a brayso that we're going to learn, that this is a subject of a controversy amongst the Tanoim between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Tana Rabbana, hachofer bar b'rshus hayochid. So we're going to start now with the shita of Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Shmuel says that since he created an entrance into his bar through rishus harabim, psachol rishus harabim, therefore he's chayiv. Now there's an issue here in the Marsha about the girsa in this brayso. According to the original girsa, which the Marsha is not happy with, the brisa should read, O shechafar bar b'shus harabim, upsachol l'shus hayochid. And l'chora, that piece, says the Marshal, should not be here in the brisa. In any event, when the Pesach is in Rishus Harabim, that creates a takola, a very dangerous situation for those who are walking in Rishus Harabim. And basically, since the Pesach of this bar is in Rishus Harabim, it's as if the bar was in Rishus Harabim, even though technically the bar is in his private yard. And not only that, according to this particular brisa, Zeu bar ha'omer b'Torah. Now, if you read that sentence literally, and we're going to have a whole sugi about that sentence, Zeu bar ha'omer b'Torah, it sounds like the classic description of bar as presented in the Pentateuch, in the Torah itself, is a case where he dug a bar in Rishus HaYochid. And that's very difficult. The simple pshat in the Torah is that the bar was dug in Rishus Harabim. In any event, this is all Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Hifkir Rishuso, V'lo Hifkir Boro, Zeu Bar Ha'omer b'Torah. Now again, in this case, where he dug the bar in his Rishus HaYochid, and then he was mafkir the Rishus around the bar, it would seem that both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel would agree that you're chayav, because that's basically a case of a chofer bar Rishus HaYochid upsachol Rishus Harabim. Because once he's mafkir the Rishus around his bar, it virtually becomes a Rishus Harabim. So the basic sugya that we're going to have here, which is going to be Rabbah and Rav Yosef, addresses the question, what is the machlokes here in this brisa between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? So we'll start with round number one, which is Rabbah. Now what I'm going to do here, for my own benefit, and I think you might want to do the same thing, is to take out a piece of paper and chart out Rabbah and Rav Yosef, and then we'll make the comparison between the two. I think that's very helpful. Amar Rabbah. Rabbah is going to explain the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva in the following way. There's certain situations in which Kuli Alma Lo Pligi, everybody agrees you're chayav. And that's the case of bar b'shus harabim. The Torah itself is talking about a case where you dug a bar b'shus harabim. The Torah says you have to pay. Kuli Alma Lo Pligi d'mechayev. My timer, the Omer Kra, ki yiftach, etc. And then it says, O ki yichre. And in both cases, the Torah says he's chayav for niskei bar. And when it says O ki yichre, that O ki yichre is redundant. Because what does ki yichre mean? Ki yichre means he dug the bar. Why did the Torah have to tell me that he's chayav for a bar that he dug? If the Torah says that he's chayav for ki yiftach, for opening a bar that somebody else dug, then al kriya lo koshkin, then it goes without saying that he's chayav if he dug a bar. So why did the Torah add the words o ki yichre ish bar? Ella shal iske psicha val iske kriya ba'olo. The responsibility, that's called ba'olo, to pay and compensate the nizak for damages, is al iske psicha al iske kriya. In other words, we're not talking about a bar that he's chayav because he owns the bar. The Torah doesn't even give us a hint or a clue regarding the ownership of the bar, but rather he's chayav for digging the bar or exposing the bar. So if that be the case, then we're not talking about a bar in his backyard. If he had a bar in his backyard, forget about digging the bar or leaving the bar exposed. All that is completely redundant and irrelevant. All that's relevant is that he owns the bar, and that's what generates the chiyuv. So therefore, once again, if we're talking about a bar that he dug in Rishus Harabim, upgerect. It goes without saying that everybody agrees he's chayiv, because that's the case that the Torah is talking about. Again, we're going to have to go back to the Bryce and try to see what Rabbi Shmuel was saying. Zeu bar ha'amar b'Torah, and he's talking about a bar b'shus hayachid. Okay, fine. Lo nechleku ella. What then is the machlokes? Because you're telling me that everybody agrees that if he digs a bar b'shus harabim, he's chayiv. I'm going to write that down on this page because again, Rav Yosef is going to disagree. So Roman numeral number 1 is Rabbah, and Rabbah says Bechofer bar b'shus harabim is kuli alma lo pligi dechayev. Okay, now we start the daf for today, daf nun, which is the next part of the bar. Okay. Now we get to the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel according to Rabbah. The bar b'shusa. He dug the bar in his own private backyard. And again, as we said earlier, he was mafkir the area around the bar. Rabbi Akiva savar bar b'shuso nami chayev. Rabbi Akiva is going to derive from an extra ribui in the pasuk that the bailus itself generates a chiv bar, even though he dug a bar b'shus harabim. So let's write now the following: Rabbi Akiva chayev al bar b'shuso. Right, and again in parentheses we'll add hifkiris b'shuso. Soviv habar. Oh, now we get to Rabbi Shmuel. Oh, so first of all, before we jump the gun to Rabbi Shmuel, how does Rabbi Akiva know that you're chayiv even for a bar in your own rishus because of the bailus that you have over the bar? After all, the Torah is talking about a case of a bar b'shus harabim. The chsiv, he's medayik from an extra phrase in the parsha. It says Baal bar yishalim. And Baal bar means that he's chayav, what generates the chayav is his bailus over the bar. And therefore, bar de is le bailim ka'amar achmonim. So the Torah was machayav you for nizikin if you own the bar. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel savar that bar b'shuso potu. Bar b'shuso potu. The Torah says Baal habar, which sounds like the machayev here is the ownership of the bar. No, that's not what the Torah means. When the Torah says Baal habar, it's not talking about the momenos, the legal ownership over the bar, but rather Baal hatakol, meaning that he was responsible for creating a takol. And that refers to either the chafira or exposing a pre-existing bar. So again, to summarize, according to Rabbah, kuliyama lo pligi, that you're chayav for a bar that you dug in Rishus Harabim. The machlokis is when you dug a bar b'shuscha in your own private yard. According to Rabbi Akiva, it says in the pasuk bala bar, which means that bailus over the bar is machayev, and therefore you're chayav. Whereas according to Rabbi Shmuel, bala bar means bala takola, and you're not chayav for digging a bar in your own rishus, because the simple pshat in the pasuk, in the entire parsha bar, is that he dug the bar of Rishus Harabim. So the Gemara asks the following: according to Rabbah, the brisa of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva makes no sense. Why? Because Elamai, what does the brisa mean when it says Zeu bar ha'om b'Torah? Now, in the case of Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbah, that you're chayav only for digging a bar in Rishus Harabim, I can understand Zeu bar ha'om b'Torah, meaning the bar ha'om b'Torah is not the way Rabbi Akiva has it, that it's the bailus over the bar that he dug in Rishuso, but rather it's the bar Rishus Harabim, and that's the bar that the Torah describes. But according to Rabbi Akiva, what do you mean Zeu bar Only this is the bar that the Torah spoke about? After all, according to Rabbi Akiva is only adding a second bar. He's not denying that a bar that you dug in Rishus Ram Yechayev for. He's only saying that even in a case where you dug a bar in your Rishus Yechayev. So why would he point out that Zeu bar Hambator, as if to say exclusive of any other bar, this is the only single bar that you're chayev for? And the Gemara answers that no, Rabbi Akiva didn't mean to say Zeu lafuke, to labimamait, that there's no other bar. But rather what he meant to say, Rabbi Yishmael, was that why does the Torah say that you're patur if you dig a bar? I'm saying, why did you, Rabbi Shmuel, say that if you dig a bar in your Rishus you're patur? No. Zeu bar shepasach bar kosav tchila l'tashlumin. When the Torah opens up the parsha of bar, this is Rabbi Akiva's argument against Rabbi Shmuel, it says bala bar yishalem. So obviously we're talking about a bar b'shuso, and he's chayav because it's his bar, and therefore the Torah calls it bal habar. He's the bal habar. So once again, just to summarize, according to Rabbi Akiva zeu bar shepasach bo, it means it's not coming. Rabbi Akiva doesn't mean to come to exclude any other bar. Obviously, a bar b'shus Rab Yechai. That's pshita. That's the simple pshat in the pasuk. But Rabbi Akiva wants to point out that the Baal HaBar pasuk sets the introductory paragraph to set up this whole parsha bar, and you own the bar. You're bailus over the bar's machal. Rabbi Shmuel, for his part, says it's not Baal HaBar, but Baal HaTakol. Okay, that's Roman numeral number 1. Now we get to Roman numeral number 2, which is Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, Omer v'bar b'shus hayachid kli avlo pligi demachayim. In other words, what Rava had as the chiddush of Rabbi Akiva, based on the pasuk Bal HaBar, that bailus over the bar when you dug it and you're on Rishus Yechayev. Well, guess what? Says Rabbi Yosef, that was accepted universally by both Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. So the first thing we want to write down here is that bar birshuso, and again, when we say bar birshuso, it means he was mafkir, the area around the bar, is kuliyamalo pligi dechayim. And why is that so? My time of Bala bar yishalim omer achmona. The Torah says that bar de islay bailim askina, which means he dug the bar in his backyard and he owns the bar. Oh, ki pligi. So now we get to the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. The bar b'rshus harabim. Wow, it's going to come out now. Sensational news. It should be on the front cover of the New York Times, right? And that is that according to Rabbi Akiva, you're not chayev for a bar b'rshus harabim. There's the Maisa. I mean, we understood the Posh Pshat in the Parsha is talking about a bar b'rshus harabim. No, Rabbi Akiva is going to say you're patur in Rishus harabim. So let's start with Rabbi Shmuel in this case. So we're going to switch the order around. And Rabbi Shmuel is going to say that by bar b'rshus harabim, Rabbi Shmuel saw by bar b'rshus harabim nami chayim, right? Bar b'rshus harabim chayim. And how so? Now we go back to Rabbi Shmuel's drasha, if you recall from the Mishnah, it says ki yiftach and ki yichra. And if you're chayiv for ki yiftach, where you didn't dig the bar, but you just uncovered the bar, then how much more so it goes without saying that you're chayiv for digging the bar? Is ki yiftach ish v'ki yichra ish im al psicha chayiv al kriya lo koshkein ella. Why did the Torah have to add ki yichra? Al iske psicha al iske kriya ba'olo. That the responsibility for this bar is a result of the fact that he dug the bar, which means it's even a bar b'rshus harabim. So we have 2 psukim, according to Rabbi Shmuel, generating 2 different machayvim of bar. One pasuk says Bala bar yishalim, and that the bailus is machayv, and that's a bar b'rshus. And now we have another pasuk of ki yichre, which means that he's chai for digging the bar, even though he doesn't own the bar, and that's a bar b'shus harab. And now we get to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Sovar. Again, in the case of bar b'shuso, Bala bar Yishalim, everybody agrees. Even Rabbi Akiva says Yechayiv. But comes along Rabbi Akiva and says that's the only Machayiv in bar. Only bar b'shuso is Chayiv. And why is that so? Now, the real kasha on Rabbi Akiva, which requires an answer, which is not even spelled out in the Gemara, the answer is going to be given, but not the kasha. And the kasha is that since we added an extra pasuk yichra, which Rabbi Shmuel pointed out taught us bar b'shus harabim, what's Rabbi Akiva going to do with the extra pasuk yichra? And the Gemara says hanu mitzvah tzriche. Di kasa rachmana ki yiftach. If the Torah only spoke about digging the bar, I'm sorry, ki yiftach, opening the bar, meaning somebody else dug the bar and he exposed the bar. Hava mina poseach hu desagile bekisui. When the Torah says v'lo yechasenu, implying that all he has to do is cover the bar, maybe that only applies to a case of a poseach where he did not dig the bar. But koreh, if he dug the bar, is lo sagi bekisui ad. He dug the bar, he has to return the status as it existed before he dug the bar, which means he's got to fill in the bar. He needs a landfill. So therefore, the Torah wants to add that ki yiftach v'lo yechasenu, meaning if he does a kisui and puts a very solid piece of metal covering over it, then he's potter, even though he dug the bar. The ikas of Rachmana. Ki yichra, if the Torah had told me that you're chai for digging the bar, hava mina kriya hu debai kisui. Because he created a bar that didn't exist before, he's responsible for that bar and he has to cover the bar. Mishum da avad maisa. He did a maisa of chafiras a bar. He dug the bar. Aval posech, when the bar was pre-existing. Somebody else dug the bar. And he exposed the bar, the law of maisa of chafira. He didn't create the bar. Ema, maybe kisui nami lo boy. Maybe we could let him off the hook. And he's not required kisui because it's the first guy who dug the bar and created the takol. He's the one who's chayv. Kamash Malon, the Torah tells us no. That since the original digger of the bar covered the bar, and now you came along and exposed the bar, you'll be chayv for that. So therefore, it comes out, according to Rav Yosef's interpretation of Rabbi Akiva, that the Torah is discussing exclusively Baal HaBar, meaning ownership over the bar when you dug a bar b'shus. We had the extra pasuk yichra with Rabbi Shmuel invoked to derive that we're talking about Rishus Harabim and Yechai for the digging. No. That's not what the Torah is trying to tell me. Torah is trying to tell me different chidushim by saying ki yiftach and ki yichra, but we're not going to derive, Rabbi Shmuel's far-reaching conclusion that Yechayev for Rishus Harabim. But now the Zeu Bar Sha'amar Torah becomes difficult, not in Rabbi Akiva as it was according to Rabbah, but in Rav Yosef according to Rabbi Shmuel. Why? After all, Rabbi Shmuel holds that you're chayiv for both a bar b'shuso and a bar b'shus harabim. So what's the zeu bar she'amar b'Torah? And the Gemara answers, zeu bar she'pasav ha'kos of tchilul l'nizikim. The bar that the Torah speaks about at the beginning of this parsha, up front in ki yiftach ki yichra, is a bar b'shus harabim. So how could you, Rabbi Akiva, say that in the case of bar b'shus harabim you're put? Okay, I think we have a in Mirz Hashem, a solid basis here in the sugya. Again, we'll have to go over it many times over till it sinks in. But let's go on in the Gemara. Masechet. We have a brisa that says Hachofer bar b'shus harabim upsacho l'shus hayochid. Right, so somebody fell in the bar by going into the entranceway in Rishus hayochid, potter. Okay, fine, he's potter because what are you doing in my Rishus hayochid? If I carry, we're going to have to understand the Mishnah, but the brisa makes sense that he's potter. Now, is a person allowed to dig a bar in Rishus harabim, underground, subterranean, dig it out, and the Pesach is in his Rishus hayochid? So on a moral level, he really did the wrong thing. Rishus harabim is not in your domain. You're not allowed to touch it, let alone dig under the underground tunnels. Imagine the danger of digging underneath Rishus harabim. Like today, we'll talk about a very heavy truck. A truck will go over an area which just has a surface level of this. Very dangerous. You had no right to do that. Again, you're not going to be chayav if a shor falls into the bar because the shor went into the entrance in your private yard. Fine. But that which you dug in Rishus harabim, under Rishus harabim, that's illegal. And the Tana wants to tell you that you're patur in a case where the entrance into the bar is Rishus hayochid, meaning in the private domain, his backyard, even though he was mafkir the area around the entrance to the bar in his rishus. And that means that the Torah was only mechayev you for a bar b'shus harabim. Now, according to Rabbah, we said that kuliyam lo pligi yechayev for a bar b'shus harabim. But according to Rav Yosef, Rav Akiva holds that you're not chayev unless it's your bar b'shuscha. Just 1 second. So again, according to Rav Yosef, if the bar was in your rishus, everybody agrees yechayev. Rabbi Shmuel says yechayev for bar b'shus harabim, and Rabbi Akiva poter bar b'shus harabim. So this is going to be very difficult according to Rabbi Akiva in the context of Rabbah. But let's go on. The Brisa continues. Hachofer boros, sichin, and ma'oros. These are 3 different types of cavities in the ground. There's a round bar, which is the classic bar. Then there's a bar that's very long and elongated and very narrow. And then there's something which is square that has a roof over it, but it's very easy to fall down from the roof. That's called a ma'ora. Fine. Is b'shus hayochid, and he dug one of the 3 above in his own private backyard. Upsachol l'shus harabim. But there's an entranceway where he created by digging all the way into Rishus harabim on the surface level of Rishus harabim. So in this case, chayev. So fine. In the first case, the entranceway was in Rishus hayochid, and he's potter. He wasn't allowed legally to dig underneath Rishus harabim. That's a danger. But he's potter for nezikin. In the second case, where he dug in his own private backyard, but there was an entranceway into Rishus harabim. That's the opening into the bar was in Rishus harabim. Therefore, he's chayav. And once again, this is going to be a problem because Rav Yosef at least had it in Rabbi Akiva that you're not chayav for a bar b'shus harabim. Next, hachofer baris b'shus hayochid hasmucha l'shus harabim. He digs a bar in his own private backyard, but it borders on the Rishus Harabim. Chayav. Why? So the answer is that he's chayav because he did something unusual. However, the Brisa says that there is a scenario in which he dug a bar Rishus Hayochid that borders on Rishus Harabim, and it's normally accepted practice to do so. What's that? So now what happens is that you need foundations for your building. You've seen a construction site, you'll always see how they blow it up, down, 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 in order that there be foundations for the building. And that he's allowed to do. And it's perfectly legitimate for him to dig into the ground and even go up to the Rishus Harabim in order to create an infrastructure, a foundation for a building that he's going to build. And that's called Chofrin Le'ushin. So Ushin means the Yisodos. But since it's not called Pshia when he dug this because of Ushin, therefore he's potter. The implication is that if it wasn't for Ushin, then not only was it illegitimate that he dug a bar right there on the boundary of Rishus Harabim, but he's going to be chayef in his zikin. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, mechayev, even in the case of chofer le'ushin, which he was legally allowed to do because he needs to set down his foundations for the building, nevertheless he's chayef for damages. He has to set up a mechitza that's 10 tfachim high, which is about 80 centimeters, and that's going to surround the construction site, the dig subterranean bar. Or if he moves into his private backyard by 4 tfachim, which means that between the Sfas HaBor and the Rishus Harabim that borders, there's a merchak, there's a distance of 4 tfach. That's 32 centimeters. Okay, fine. Oh, now the Gemara is going to ask a kasha. Let's be medayik from the language of the Brisa. Taima de le'ushin. The reason why he's potter when he digs these foundations in his backyard is because that's the normal, acceptable, legitimate way that a person digs a bar. There's no pshia whatsoever by digging that bar. The implication is holav le'ushin. If it had not been for ushin, which again, when he's building a building and he sets up the bar as a foundation, in order to set up the foundations for the building. Right, when I was a kid, they used to say a building is as strong as its foundations. Holav le'ushin, if he didn't have that legitimacy and permission to dig the bar, chayav. Okay, fine, that's the sefer. Who does that work out according to? Let's go back to our chart for a moment. And we're talking about bar b'shusa. So that according to Rava, we're talking about Rabbi Akiva in the Sefer of Ushin. Of course, it was Rabbi Akiva who was Mechadesh based on the Pasuk, Bala bar, that Bailus over the bar is a Mechayim. Rabbi Shmuel, on the other hand, held bar b'shusa as potter. So therefore, according to Rava, based on the diuk that we just were medayik in the Sefer could only be sensible according to Rabbi Akiva. But now we go back to the Reisha. And the Reisha says that even though he had no legitimate right to dig under the Rishus Harabim, and morally he is, it's reprehensible, but nevertheless, he's potter for damages. Now, Rabbi Akiva says that you're chayav for bar b'shuso. So he can't accept that you're potter because the opening in the bar is in your backyard. It could only be according to Rabbi Shmuel. So now it comes out, according to Rabbah, again, it's a little bit dachuk, but Reisha Rabbi Shmuel, the Sefer Rabbi Akiva. That's not a problem. Gemara is willing to live with it. El Rav Yosef. Now we go back to the chart, and according to Rav Yosef, the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is bar b'shus harabim. Rabbi Akiva was poter. Is bishlei Masechet divrei hakol. The sefer is bar b'shuso, and he's chayav if it wasn't for the sake of ushin. El Reisha, the Reisha, we said that if he digs a bar in his backyard, well, let me say it this way: if he tunnels through Rishus Harabim and the entrance into the bar is in his backyard, he's poter. Mani. Lo Rabbi Shmuel v'lo Rabbi Akiva. Because according to Rabbah, we said that bar b'shuso kuliyamalo pli that yechayev. And the pasuk ubal habar yishalem, in its simple pshat, was accepted by both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. And yet here, in the Reisha, where the entrance to the bar is in Rishus, so he's potter. Nobody would say he's potter, not Rabbi Akiva, not Rabbi Shmuel, because according to Rabbi Yosef, everybody agrees, Kol Yamalo Pligi, that bar B'shuso is chayev. The only machlokus was in bar B'shus Harabim. Omelcha Rabbi Yosef, Kula Divrei Hakol. The entire brisa is unanimously accepted. So in the Sefer, where he dug a bar b'shuso, and he didn't have the heter of Ushin, he's going to be chayav. And according to Rabbi Yosef, bar b'shuso is chayav according to both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. But what about the Reisha? The Reisha says that when the entrance to the bar is in his rishus, he's potter. And the answer is lo hifkir lo rishus lo bar. Everybody would agree that bar b'shuso is potter. I have a right to dig a bar in my backyard. What I'm not allowed to do is dig a bar in my backyard and then be mafkir the area around the bar, because then I virtually have a bar b'shus harabim. And therefore the Reisha, which is the case where lo hifkir, he did not mafkir, he just dug a bar in his backyard, he's potter. And he says to the Baal Hashor that fell into the bar, why did you bring your shor into my private domain? Gemara adds the following: Omer Avashi hashta do kimta l'Rav Yosef l'divrei hakol. Once you've worked it out in a way that, according to Rav Yosef, the brisa reflects a unanimous ruling, now we can go back to Rabbah in the drawing board and generate a reconciliation with Rabbah that would be unanimous. How so? Lefi Rabbah nami lo tukma kitanoi. We don't have to say that the machlokas here and the steer between the Reish and the Sefer is machlokas tanoim, but rather right? Because again, the Gemara wasn't so smooth in the Gemara's mind that the Reisha represents the Shita of Rabbi Shmuel, the Sefer represents the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. The Reisha Rabbi Shmuel, Sefer Nami Rabbi Shmuel. So when you open up a brisa with a Reisha and it goes according to Rabbi Shmuel, you'd like the Sefer also to go according to Rabbi Shmuel, and that's what the Gemara is going to do now. How so? And keep in mind that according to Rabbah, Rabbi Shmuel holds that a bar b'shuso is potur. Taima de ushit. Holav de Ushin Chayav. How are we going to square Rabbi Shmuel according to Rabbah with the diuk that we medayik in the Sefer that if it wasn't for Ushin, he'd be Chayav? And the answer is Kigon, the Arvach Arvuchi. He expanded the digging, the bar. How much so? Into Rishus Harabim. It means that part of the bar extends into Rishus Harabim, and therefore even Rabbi Shmuel would hold that although there's no chiyuv for bar b'shuso, in this case he's chayav, unless he was chofer leushin. See, it comes out here that if he was chofer leushin, even though he was marchiv the bar into Rishus Harabim, he's potter. That's a pellet. Just want to see if he. Yeah. It's the Rashba Esses Kasha. He says, even though Tikkun Olam has it that he's allowed to be Chofer Bar Le'ushin, but Mikomakom Tzorach L'Schayev Ben Ezekiel, he should be Chayev somebody because he went into Rishus Harabim. Kevet Shechofer Rishus Harabim. And what's the Rashba's answer? He says she'efshel shechafira la'orech yisodos nitzreches biyoser liyishuv hamedina. So basically, he's saying that the case of Chofer Le'ushin, even though he dug into Rishus Harabim, and nevertheless, that's also part of Tikkun HaMedina, and that allows everyone to do such a thing. Meisvei, now we have another kasha on Rav Yosef. We learned that a Raisa Chofer Bar B'Rishus HaYochid, Upsachol Rishus Harabim Chayav. So this is clear. He opened up a bar B'Rishus Harabim. Yeah, but it's not so easy because that's against Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yosef was of the opinion that Rabbi Akiva holds that the whole parsha is talking about bar B'Rishus. And here he's chayav because the Pesach of the bar is in Rishus Harabim. Let's go on. If he digs the bar B'Rishus HaYochid Asmucha Rishus Harabim, potter. So Gemara says the following: Bishlei Mila Rabba Kula Rabbi Shmuel. Right, because according to Rabba, Rabbi Shmuel was Machadish Bar B'Rishus potter. So therefore, in the case of B'Rishus HaYochid Asmucha Rishus Harabim, he's potter. And that's according to Rabbi Shmuel. El Rav Yosef, who holds a bar b'shu, so everybody says Yechayev, especially a Reisha ki Rabbi Shmuel. The Reisha that says Yechayev for a bar b'shu sarab, that's Rabbi Shmuel. El a Seifa that says that you're potter if you dig a bar in your own rishus, mani lo Rabbi Shmuel lo Rabbi Kiva. Because according to Rabbah, if you dig a bar b'shu, so kuliyamalo pligi v'ischayev. Rav Yosef will answer that the Seifa is talking about Chofer Le'ushin v'Divrei HaKol. As we said before, since the Takonis HaMedina allows him to dig in his own Rishus in order to set up foundations, is everybody agrees that he's put. Tona Rabbanon, we learned in the Brisa, Chofar u'Posach. Right, he dug a bar, or he opened a bar in Rishus Harabim, U'Mosel Harabim, and he allowed the Rabbim to drink from the water in the bar is potter. Now, I'm not sure what is this Mesira l'Rabban. 1 second. Right, so he invites the rabbim to drink from the bar. Now, I'm not sure why. Do you have any note on this? Why does he have to invite the rabbim if he dug the bar in Rishus HaRabbim? Just 1 second. One second. Chofar ba'u pasach u'mosel rabbim. Why do we need a Mesir l'Rabbim here? I don't get it. Anybody have something in that you could share with us?
I think he's just opening this for public use, and he puts up a sign.
But again, we're going to say he's potter because he gave it over with a Mesira l'Rabbim. Now the rabbim are responsible. But I don't understand why you need a Mesira l'Rabbim. Forget about Mesira l'Rabbim. Mesira l'Rabbim means that he invites the rabbim to benefit from the bar. It becomes like a cistern, and they could draw water from the bar. But why do we need him to do so if he dug the bar in Rishus HaRabbim? Like, what kind of chutzpah? You dig a bar in Rishus HaRabbim, and now I need you to be moser it? Because look at the next case. It says chafru pasach v'lo masel l'Rabbim. What do you mean lo masel l'Rabbim? You dig a bar in Rishus HaRabbim, I need you to be moser l'Rabbim. I need you to put up a sign. Everyone's welcome to drink the water from a bar in Rishus HaRabbim. I'm missing just a piece of the puzzle here. I don't know. I'm just going to leave it because we're trying to do the daf, but there's something missing here. All right, the brisa goes on. V'chein min hagu shel nechunya chofer boris shichin u'ma'oros shahoye chofer u'poseach u'mosel rab. So it's like a public service. He did he's a good guy. Why? Because he was moser this bar to the rabbi. That Nechunya was makayim this halacha of digging a bar Rishus Rabbim and being moser it l'Rabbim, and he's potter if anybody falls into the bar. So again, I understand why he's potter, because if he's doing some sort of public service, then it's not a pshi on his part that he dug the bar. So I think now maybe we could give a little bit of an answer to that previous question. Maybe if the rabbim are going to benefit, so their animals can drink from the water that falls down into the bar, then the entire rabbim give him permission to dig the bar. But again, it's not 100%. I have to admit it, because I don't understand the emphasis here on Mesira l'Rabbim, as if to say he could decide, I'm going to dig a bar Rishus HaRabbim, and no one's allowed to use the bar. Maybe the Rishus HaRabbim is hefker. I don't know. Anyway, halacha zu v'sulo ela ema af halacha zu. The Gemara says, oh, this halacha, Nechunya was makayim. as if to say this is the only one. No, it means even this halacha, he was Mekayim. Tana Rabbana Ma'aseh b'bito shel Nechumya chofer sichin u'ma'oro shenafla lebar gadol. Whoa. This is a case of Ruach HaKodesh. Why? Bava dias Rabbi Chineni Mendoza, that you should pray on behalf of your daughter. She fell into the bar. Shar Rishona Amalehem Shalom. In other words, I know Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh that she'll survive because he did a public service, right? Ushnia, same thing. Amalem Shalom. Shlishis, a third hour after she fell in the bar, Amalehem, he said to them, also, by now she got out of the bar. How does he know such a thing? Amrullah mi helech me'abar. Amrulahem, Zachar shel rechelim nizdamin li v'zokin echad manhigo. There was a male sheep and an older person came along and he lifted me up from the bar. Amrulo, they said to Rav Chanina Mendoza, Noviata? How did you know for sure that she wouldn't die? Very dangerous situation. You fall into a bar. Amalem, Rav Chanina answered, Lo Novi Anoi, Lo Ben Novi Anochi, El Kacha Marti. Dover Shosa Tzadik Mitztar Bo Yikoshel Bo Zaro. Nechunya did such work for the sake of the rabbin by digging this bar so that people could use the bar. And Rashi adds, Ole Regolim. It's impossible that his daughter would die in the same bar. Amar of Acha, Afal Pichen, even though Nechumya put in such work for the benefit of Sipuk HaMayim Lola Regolim, nevertheless, Meis Beno Batsam, the son of Nechumya, died from starvation. So you might say that either Nechumya, or his son were guilty of some heinous crime, and therefore, even though this was a public service act of digging a bar in Rosh Hashanah to allow for the Oli Regel to drink from the bar, Shenemar usvivav nisarami od pasuk in Tilly, Malavish Kodesh Baruch Medagdik im svivav afilu kechut asaro. So it's not that there was any guilt here of some major crime, one of the big three cardinal sins, Chas v'Shalom. There may have been some subtle sin, which for you and I would not even be considered a sin, but on the level of tzaddikim, who are dveikim b'Hakadosh Baruch Hu, there's a special midas hadin, kechut hasayra. And Rab Nechunya derives it from another pasuk, Kel na'arotz b'sod k'toshim rava v'nora al kol svivos. God is matel ema, a fear of mishpat Hashem, and sometimes the mishpat is makbid kechud asayim. I guess this is very relevant to what we're going through now. Hearing about chayalim shenaflu. So my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik used to always talk about the relativity theory in sin. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu was very medagdik with Nadav Avihu, the Bnei Aaron. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was very medagdik with the Bnei Pinchas. The Bnei Eli, I meant to say. Pinchas and Chofni. And actions that would not be considered sinful for you and I on our level would be considered a terrible sin for a tzaddik. Person says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to punish you for sins. He's a good guy. Pat him on the back. He'll let you go. Is Yivat Luchan. Yifkaru Chaya V'Gufa. Shenemar Atzur Tamim Paloki Kol Drachav Mishpat. Mishpat means din. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't look the other way when there's din. What does the pasuk mean? Erech apayim v'lo ksiv erech af.